probably see what I see, and I have to be back as soon as I can.
It's still not clear exactly why Trump is departing a day early.
It isn't a good outcome for Anthony Albanese. It's not a reflection on Australia in particular, but in a domestic political sense, it's going to be difficult for Anthony Albanese going forward.
Hey there, Tom.
Hi, Nour, great to be with you.
There is a lot changing over there at the moment. We are talking to you at 1 p.m. Sydney time and 9 o'clock over in Calgary, Canada. How did the travelling media learn that US President Donald Trump was cutting short his time at the G7?
We'd just come out of a press conference with Anthony Albanese. He had 2 bilateral meetings today, one with the new South Korean president and one with Mark Rutte, the head of NATO. And he was updating us on those things and was asked about all of the happenings around Donald Trump today. We were heading out of the summit venue and getting ready to come back to our hotel just as tweets started flowing about Donald Trump deciding to head home early. And the news went through our travelling pack like wildfire, and a lot of stories had to be updated pretty quickly.
It's still not clear exactly why Trump is departing a day early. News that he was heading back to Washington broke after he had warned everyone in Tehran to evacuate. It's pretty extraordinary given it is a city of 10 million people and it's all very ominous. What is the mood, the atmosphere like over at the G7 at the moment?
Certainly there's a mood of disappointment in the Australian contingent. I think they were looking forward to ticking off the meeting with Donald Trump, and in a list of bilateral meetings Anthony Albanese had planned, obviously Donald Trump was the biggest and most important. There's been a lot of pressure on the government to have this meeting, and there's been a lot of anticipation building as we've gone through this trip, getting ready for the meeting with Trump. So I think they're disappointed. I think more broadly, there's probably a jarring feeling across the G7. Just earlier today, the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney was saying that there's no G7 without US leadership, and they had been discussing plans for a statement about the war in the Middle East. They were getting ready for all kinds of activities tomorrow. So I think they'll be disappointed as well. And it'll be a dynamic shift. Donald Trump is a giant in whatever room he walks into, more than the US president is anyway, I think, in these international forums. But they'll have a different dynamic tomorrow as a result of him heading home tonight.
And what do we know so far about why Donald Trump has made this abrupt departure?
Yeah, the press secretary, Caroline Levitt, said that he had important matters to attend to at the White House. And when the G7 leaders were getting together for the family photo, as they call it, this afternoon here in Canada, local time, he said within earshot of a camera that he thought that the other leaders would understand why he was going home, that he had work to do.
You probably see what I see, and I have to be back as soon as I can. We're going to have dinner with these wonderful leaders, and then I get on the plane. I have to be back early.
And the media is reporting that he has told members of the National Security Council and key officials in the White House to be ready in the Situation Room when he gets back. So it suggests, I mean, obviously it's connected with the conflict in the Middle East. It suggests there's some kind of development coming. I also think that Trump isn't necessarily the most comfortable in these settings. The last time he came to a G7 in Canada, he blew up the joint communique from the leaders and accused then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of being disrespectful and really overshadowed that. And he did that at other international events as well. So I think he's going back to his comfort zone where he's the leader of the free world and no one can challenge him in any way.
As you say, Tom, it's not clear if his departure is a precursor to some sort of escalation against Iran or if there is movement when it comes to ceasefire negotiations. Is there anything that you've been able to glean being there amongst other travelling media, diplomats, world leaders?
There's certainly an appetite for a de-escalation. Everyone is saying it's time to de-escalate, that the conflict risks growing into something much bigger, and no one wants that. I think there's pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. Leaders here want to discuss the actions that Israel is taking, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether there's expectations of some huge military action on Tehran involving the United States, even though Trump has posted along those lines. In the public commentary anyway, it's been more focused on a joint statement from the G7 leaders excluding Trump along the lines of de-escalation and dialogue. And I think that in capitals around the world, there's clearly a frustration with how Israel is handling this conflict and the broader set of military actions that it's taking in Gaza. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, said here today that Donald Trump had said he was considering the prospect of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran.
If the United States can achieve a ceasefire, that is a very good thing, and France will support it, and we hope for it. Next, I say that it is absolutely essential that all strikes by both sides against energy, administrative, and cultural infrastructure, and even more so against the civilian population, cease. Nothing justifies them. They are absolutely intolerable.
That could be a positive development. I think the leaders here would be pretty pleased to hear that if it is possible. Macron said that there was an offer to get a ceasefire and kickstart broader discussions about peace. And he was saying that the leaders will have to work out where the sides are going on that, whether that deal is actually possible. That could be what Donald Trump is racing back to Washington to work on. It doesn't necessarily mean that a deal it's going to be a difficult deal. It doesn't necessarily mean that they'll get it over the line, but US leadership in that kind of agreement could be good, especially because Trump's got some influence with Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel.
You know, at these conferences, Tom, obviously world leaders discuss a whole range of matters. Israel's attacks on Iran and Iran's retaliation are looming large over the G7. Have leaders been able to accomplish anything in that regard at this stage? I know there's still a day to go, but, what happens in Trump's absence now?
Well, I suspect they'll go on ahead with the statement. He was refusing to sign it anyway. It'll be interesting to see the language in that. It'll be interesting to see how it's described. Is it a statement from the G7 summit or is it just the participating countries and groups? Equally, they've got a full agenda anyway. International trade, climate change, cooperation on all kinds of economic measures are on the agenda as well. So I think that they will push on with that agenda and make sure that Trump's absence doesn't mean that the summit is unsuccessful, but it definitely reduces the kind of full force of any outcomes from the G7, the fact that the US president has left early.
As you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, Tom, there was a lot riding on the meeting between Anthony Albanese and President Donald Trump, for Australia at least. How has the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister's office responded to this, now cancellation of that meeting?
Through a spokesperson, the Prime Minister has said that it's understandable but disappointing. He says that everyone around the world wants a resolution to the war in the Middle East. I have seen various government ministers saying things along the same lines and talking about the early steps in a good relationship between Anthony Albanese and Donald Trump, regardless of this speed bump, I guess you'd say. They've spoken on the phone a few times. But there's a political element at home as well. The opposition has accused the government of not working hard enough to try and get a meeting with Trump in his first few months back in the White House, and instead relying unwisely on a meeting on the sidelines of an international summit. Even some Liberals, like the New South Wales Senator Dave Sharma, say that this is a failure of diplomacy and that the government has been too slow to really engage properly with the Trump administration.
So, Tom, are there any indications that another meeting will be rescheduled? Where does this leave AUKUS and the issue of tariffs?
Anthony Albanese has indicated that he will go to the UN in September, and it's possible that a White House visit could be attached to that trip. That has happened many times for Australian Prime Ministers in the past. But the question of the Pentagon's review of Aukus is very pressing. They're doing a 30-day review, and Anthony Albanese had been expected to make the case for Aukus to Donald Trump in the hope that the US would continue with that agreement and not withdraw. We had a hint of his view on that today after his meeting with Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister.
Marine agreement, is that still proceeding? You've initiated a sort of review of that.
Yeah, we're proceeding with that. It's a really important deal to both of us. I think the President is doing a review. We did a review when we came into government, so that makes good sense to me. But It's a really important...
We're very long-time partners and allies and friends, and we become friends in a short period of time.
The two were asked about AUKUS. Keir Starmer said that it was a really important agreement. Donald Trump nodded along and talked up the strong ties between friends and allies, meaning the UK and probably Australia, but he didn't specifically speak about the nuclear submarines agreement. On trade tariffs, another very important issue for the government that they haven't had a chance to engage with Donald Trump yet on. I think the urgency there will be pretty great. Australia wants to be exempted from steel and aluminium tariffs. The UK has a similar deal already locked in. So I think it'll be difficult for the government to make the case until they can get a meeting locked in, perhaps a couple of months from now if it's in September. It's possible that they could use other levers to try and make the case, ministerial level visits, even official level conversations. But Trump seems to want to make high profile, front page news deals with foreign leaders. And so far, Anthony Albanese hasn't been able to get in the room to make the case for Australia.
Tom, you wrote earlier this week that a boring meeting between the pair would be the best outcome for Anthony Albanese. What about no meeting?
It isn't a good outcome for Anthony Albanese. It's not a reflection on Australia in particular, but in a domestic political sense, it's going to be difficult for Anthony Albanese going forward. The reason I argued that a boring meeting could be a good outcome was that he might be able to avoid some of the theatrics that we've seen where Donald Trump has berated other leaders in the Oval Office, taken objection with deals or policies at home. Obviously, that won't happen now. But as we've said, there was important lobbying and discussions that the Prime Minister wanted to have with the President, and they haven't yet had a chance to try and build personal rapport. And I do think that is important in the US-Australia alliance. Like with other world leaders, if there's goodwill between the two, if there's a bit of personal connection and friendship, that's got to be a good thing. And while they've talked on the phone a few times and Trump has publicly praised Anthony Albanese, they haven't got in the room, they haven't been able to find things in common or kind of build that face-to-face rapport yet. I think they'll be pretty keen to do that, the Australian side anyway.
Obviously, right round the world, eyes have been fixed on the G7, now back on Washington as Donald Trump returns there. What else is on the agenda for the summit and for Anthony Albanese now that this meeting with President Trump has been usurped by other more urgent matters?
Well, Anthony Albanese still has a full day at Kananaskis tomorrow. It's going to be an early start at the summit site. It's at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. He's meeting Ursula von der Leyen, the EU boss. He's meeting Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister. He is meeting all kinds of world leaders in a pretty packed schedule. So there's still work to be done, even if Donald Trump isn't here for his meeting. And equally, the G7 more broadly has important work to do. Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader, will be here for a special session on the war with Russia. I think there's potential for that to go better with Donald Trump's absence than maybe otherwise. Anthony Albanese repeated today Australia's promise to be part of a peacekeeping force if one was necessary, if a ceasefire is reached with Russia in that conflict. Equally, they've got work to do on climate change and the transition to renewable energy. And I think they'll talk about the international economy and the significant headwinds that exist there as well.
Well, Tom, we really appreciate you jumping on the line with us at 9 o'clock over there in Canada. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Nora. It's great to be with you.